Hey everyone, this is Stephanie with Pet Poo Skiddoo, where we scoop up the poo and compost it too. I want to make more videos showing you guys how to compost dog waste. A big difference between composting dog waste and human waste, if you think about it, the dog waste is on the ground. It's outside, in the environment, exposed to all different kinds of weather before we actually go in to collect it. So for instance, on sunny days, the waste will actually dry out a bit. The liquid will escape to the ground before we get a chance to scoop it. And in that condition, where hopefully throughout the year most of the dog waste is in, that's really easy to compost. It's just like my last video where it's basically just dog waste, and then we sprinkle in some soybean meal, and every now and then you have to water it. However, when it rains, it's a completely different story. A lot of times we'll get dog waste soaked, and it's basically mud. And that has a different process that we do to it before it even goes in the composter. So I'm going to show you that. Alright, so in this blue bucket, I'm going to pour in the drier dog waste that we like to get. And you can kind of hear the sounds of the individual waste go into the bucket. And you can see it's just dry. Now, this is on a rainy day, and we'll get containers full of this stuff. And you can see, it's heavy, by the way. It's all just one big clump. And I don't really want to go in too much and touch this stuff, but you can see it's already so wet and condensed, especially with pressure from the other bags being on it. It's just mud, is what I call it. Alright, so I have 2 5-gallon buckets of the wet waste now that I gathered, and we can't compost the wet waste as it is. It's too dense, too heavy. It's going to smash down everything else you already have in your composter. There's no way for air to get in throughout the bucket because the waste is just basically in one giant wet clump or mud pile. So what we need to do is mix it with something so that it'll break down more into pieces again. So what we're going to do is add in a series of ingredients. That's going to be fine pine shavings. That is a carbon, so carbon is a good thing for composting, but I don't think of it as carbon-nitrogen ratios. I think more of the pine shavings as a drying agent. So that will help you understand how much to put in. You'll notice, if the waste is a certain level of moisture, you'll get a feel for how much pine shavings to put in. We're also going to put in garden lime, not hydrated lime, not pelletized lime. The real cheap stuff, it's the $3-4 for a 50-pound bag. And then we're also going to sprinkle in the soybean meal like before. So I have these 55-gallon barrels that I cut vertically. This is what I use for mixing wet waste. I have it on some boards at a slight tilt, and we'll be mixing everything together in these. I'll show you how that works. Okay, I poured my 2 5-gallon buckets of the waste into the barrel, and now because it's pretty wet, I'm going to use 1.5 buckets, which is about 7.5 gallons of the pine shavings. For now, I suggest always doing less at first, and then you could always add pine shavings in. You don't want to accidentally have too much pine shavings or too much carbon, because that will slow the composting process down. I'm also going to add in these scoopfuls. I have this little bowl I use to spread the lime around in. And lime I think of more like flour, kind of when you're baking and you want to dry out wet dough and you keep adding in flour. That's kind of what lime does. So the pine shavings is going to soak up the overall wetness, and then the garden lime is really going to get in there to help separate the clumps. And then of course we'll want to sprinkle in our soybean meal, because our little microbe guys like that stuff. And then you're just going to start mixing it. See how that's one big chunk right there? We want to get all this together in there to separate everything out. And although this would go a lot faster with machines, this is just a great way when you're starting out your business and you don't have money for machines. You just need an old barrel and a pitchfork. You can do it. So you really need something that's going to break down as fast as the dog waste. Leaves take a little too long. And you can use straw, but it has to be that really fine, thin straw. You don't want to just use regular hay straw or anything. So you can see now that with all the ingredients mixed in, it's more broken down into smaller pieces. The air is going to be able to get in through the pile a lot faster. And basically you're ready to put this in buckets and throw into your composter. Now here's a good example of waste that's just a little wet, but it's still, you could still see the individual pieces of the waste, which means it's not too saturated. So it still needs some ingredients. So what I'm going to do is just take directly from the bag. And you know, you can see I'm not measuring it, but you kind of get a feel for how much it's going to need after a while. Similar if you were a baker. I know it's probably a weird comparison, right? But now I'm just using a metal, I don't even know what this is, to be honest, skewer, I don't know, metal stick to mix this up, and you can see already it's feeling pretty dry. Now because I've done this for a while, I kind of knew how much to throw in, but again, you always want to throw in a little less than you think at first, just get used to it. And then I just sprinkle some of that lime in and soybean meal. And it's easy to stir this when you only have half a bucket full. So I wouldn't fill it up all the way. And then just like so, now it's ready for your composter. So hopefully this helps out. If you know you're going to have a rainy week or a rainy month even, you could layer the composter, your earth cube or tote or whatever you're using, with the pine shavings, just a thin layer, pine shavings, the lime, and a bit of soybean meal. Because even though we've broken apart the wet waste, there's still a lot of liquid in the dog waste. We didn't get rid of that. The sawdust isn't going to soak all that up. So the liquid is going to kind of separate and go to the bottom, and that's where a lot of liquid's going to be. Hopefully a lot of it goes through your drain port. If not, it's going to need that extra layer of pine shavings to help soak it up. Now, if you've dealt with a lot of rain for weeks, you'll notice that your tote might still be wet even though you've put in so much pine shavings. So every now and then, if it starts getting wet, you can throw extra into the composter, just a few handfuls at a time, hoping to kind of balance it out. And it's funny, some days if it's a rainy week, I'll go through bags and bags of pine shavings, and then other times it'll be nice and sunny and I don't have to add in anything. And in fact, I'll have to add in water. So I know a lot of websites will concentrate on carbon to nitrogen. When it comes to dog waste, you are just always trying to get it to that great moisture level where it's dry but just has that little bit of moisture in there, and it's going to heat up fantastically.